this again.
I'm ready if you are, Kathy.
My pen's from the car to here. The second time in a row I've lost it. Yes, please. But I had nice little colored ones, too. You love it. Thank you.
What's right? This is an urban renewal. This is joint. So you just sit back and do nothing.
Good try.
I did. It's so funny.
On record?
We good to go?
Yes.
Okay. We're going to call to order the City Council Urban Renewal Agency joint work session for Monday, May 15th. It's about 2:35 p.m. We're going to dispense with Pledge of Allegiance, go to a roll call, and get started. Kathy, give us a roll call.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Dick Anderson.
Here.
Riley Hoagland. Excuse Deanna Hinton.
Here.
Judy Casper.
Here.
Susan Walke.
Here.
And Kip Ward.
Here.
And as usual, we'll dispense of needing to get the chair's permission to speak. Just go ahead, and if we start crossing over each other, I'll kind of jump in and rein things in. But other than that, this is a chance to discuss these issues. So, Ron?
Okay, we have 3 parts to this work meeting, and we'll go until you guys say where it's time to be done, or until the Budget Committee meeting gets started. We're actually anticipating a couple of hours, so we'll be done by 4:30. Our first item on the agenda is a presentation by the Bay Area Merchants Association, which is commonly referred to as BAMA, and so I'll turn the time, Allison's going to introduce them, so I'll turn the time over to her.
Hello. So I just wanted to give a brief background on why BAMA's here. We're very glad that they're here. They would like to provide an update thus far for the Urban Renewal Grant Program for the downtown manager. And this is a 2-year pilot project, budget approval, of course, pending. But this is really something that we have been working on for a few years, and they did hiring of the downtown manager in the fall, and so they haven't had a full year with the program, with the grant program, but they're here just to kind of give an update and touch base on what they've accomplished so far.
Mayor and City Council, I'm Bob Gibson. Am I supposed to state my address?
Just your names are great for the record.
Okay.
And if you could pull the mic closer, the whole thing moves, so feel free.
Okay. Well, thanks for allocating time for us this afternoon. What I'd like to do is share with you a little bit about the what we've done with the organization of the Bay Area Merchants Association, and then go into some of the details as far as the recruiting and hiring of our downtown manager, and kind of where we are now and what some of the challenges that we're looking at, kind of where things are at. Back in 2015, we were working, we started working, the Bay Area Merchants Association started working on the recruiting and hiring of the downtown manager. The grant had been approved by the city, and that was moving forward. At the time, Alex Ward was the president of the association, and we were moving forward with that as well as other projects. As you're aware, the Bay Area Merchants Association really is about representing the merchants and the businesses of the Taft area, the 51st Street along 101, and there are members throughout, really from throughout the community. As we moved forward, as the association moved forward, the focus, the leadership of the organization was really carried, the weight was carried by Alex and the members. Mr. Ward here was actively involved with it, and other folks were involved, but the leadership was kind of focused with just a few people, and then whoever would show up at the meeting. As we got through or started to work towards the recruiting of a downtown manager, one of the needs was to develop a job description. And for better or worse, two of the folks that were involved with the organization, myself and Jerry, have HR background, and so we put together a job description, refined the one that was used for the grant, and put together a job description that probably was shooting for the stars as far as qualifications and what the responsibilities were going to be. But we felt like that there's a 2-year opportunity here that to really hit the ball out of the park, and that we wanted to really shoot high. And there's really, we feel like there's one chance to make this really successful. So as I say, that was back in 2015. We advertised, the board or the association advertised at the time, and we had a series of interviews, and they weren't successful. It wasn't the right time, and we're going to talk a little bit more specifically in just a moment as far as how we progressed from that. But at that time, we had a change in the leadership of the organization. We also revised the bylaws, and I'm embarrassed and I have to apologize. The bylaws that you received in your packet are not the current bylaws. They're bylaws from back several years. I have a copy of the new bylaws, and we'll pass that out or make that available to you. But the bylaws were changed, and the board of directors was really formalized with officers and then members at large, so that it represented the group and the association, and also so that there would be specific responsibilities and raise the level of accountability as far as the board goes, and so that we could start building even more value into the memberships. And towards that goal, I guess, we started a process annually of developing goals and objectives, and so that we had some direction and there was a rudder under our ship. The mission statement, and I won't bore you with this, but it's to read it verbatim, but the mission statement is really all about supporting business and individual members in South Lincoln City. The vision statement is to be the voice of the successful business community in South Lincoln City. And by that, I think that's an important piece of the puzzle. We can provide a voice for businesses in the south part of Lincoln City, and in doing that, work with groups such as the City Council, work with groups such as the Chamber of Commerce and other organizations within the community as far as funding opportunities, as far as events, and really be a voice for that part of the business community. The goals, we have 5 goals, and again, you have a copy of these, so I won't go through them individually, but each of the 5 goals, they define a specific area of work for the association, from the administrative function, from marketing, developing an image and identity for the organization, and then finally, the last goal, and I'll speak to this in just a few minutes, strengthen the sustainability for the downtown manager's position. That's really an important piece of this. We believe that everything that we do should fall under one of these goals. If it doesn't, if somebody brings up an idea and it doesn't clearly fall under one of these goals, then we have to ask the question, is it something that we should be working on? Sometimes organizations like this get sidetracked and they get the resources spent off in different directions. And by having these 5 defined goals, then that keeps us more focused and keeps us going in a positive direction. Under each goal, there is a series of objectives. These are the things that you can measure. They're the fundamental part of a work plan, and again, provide more specific direction as far as the organization. So that's what we're about, that's what we're working on, and that's the structure that we've designed over the last several years. The first president of the Bay Area Merchants Association was Jerry Knudsen, and she's here to speak to the hiring process and that sort of thing. Jerry?
Thank you, Mayor and Council.
Jerry, you're going to need to pull that mic closer to you. There you go. Thank
How's
you
that?
so much. Perfect.
All right, thank you. Thank you for allowing us to be here, Mayor and Council. When I started as president of BAMA, we knew that one of the goals that we had was to hire a downtown manager. We, at that time, confirmed in a meeting with Kurt Olson that the funding was still available, even though it had been a couple years since we had applied for the grant. So we went ahead with the recruitment. We based an ad on the job description that we had developed, and then advertised in various newspapers and on social media and in the Oregon Employment Office. We received applications and, as a result, held interviews sometime in July. We found that we had an outstanding candidate in those interviews, and we hired her on November 1st. Since then, she's just done a remarkable job. We went from the membership being around 16 paid members to, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it's 32 paid members. So again, an outstanding job. We also partnered with the college for a space for the downtown manager to reside and have an office space, telephone, and that sort of thing. So I think it's been a really positive, had a positive effect on the Bay Area Merchants Association.
As we transitioned into 2017, we with our downtown manager Susan, we developed the work plan. We've worked on the goals and objectives, and one of the things that we're focused on right now is the outreach to the businesses, and of course, part of what the Bay Area Merchants Association has been working on over the years historically is are the events like the Sandcastle Contest, the Christmas on 51st Street, and participation with the Halloween events for our children, and then there's also a car show down in the south part of Lincoln City. And so these things, we're going to continue these things. We're going to make sure that they continue. Our level of involvement, we may be getting other people involved. We may be trying to leverage other resources into some of these events. Honestly, we feel like the value of the Bay Area Merchants Association is much more than just providing events. That we can be a voice and that we can be involved with making things better and stronger for the businesses in the south part of Lincoln City. And so we're looking at that side of things as well, and want to have an impact with that. Now, I mentioned the sustainability. We feel like the sustainability of the downtown manager, we need to figure out a way that we can maintain that position. Because of the grant, we have a 2-year opportunity to demonstrate the value, and part of the success, I believe, is to demonstrate that value to the businesses. The more memberships we have, the stronger the association will be, and it will compound the benefit, I believe. So we're going to be looking at as many resources as we can as far as the sustainability. Our membership fee, $65. It's going to take a bunch of members to pay to keep it sustainable. So we're going to be looking at other kinds of resources to ensure that happens. We really believe that we have just a wonderful opportunity with this, and we realize that if we're successful, that perhaps other areas of the community can do the same thing. And so we very much appreciate your support, and we appreciate the opportunity to lead out on this. With that, I would ask if there's any questions.
Go ahead.
Yeah, if I could, I'm happy to hear you steal my notes that I was going to ask. So you've covered most of it, and a couple of times you reiterated, I always like to know that you know it's a 2-year pilot. The funding, I don't care what you do after, but the funding is a 2-year. And I would say, yes, the whole entire city really benefits from a vibrant business community in the South. So that, too, is why at least I voted for it through Urban Renewal. So I'm supporting. The question I have is 6 months from hire, not looking for evaluation, but looking for criteria that you think the business community is going to evaluate this project on in order to make it sustainable.
Right.
Because you indicated, even though you used the word part of, I view it as probably the entire business community, South End, is going to have to see value in order to support such an ongoing. But how will they evaluate it, do you think? What's the criteria that you've helped them identify?
I believe that, and we can all answer that, I believe, but I believe that adding value to the membership, in other words, being a viable, credible voice for that business community is one of the major assets. As a business down there, that's what I look at. Is there a group or an organization that I can look to speak out about signage? That's one of the issues that we have. Blade signs specifically, and about advertising on the sidewalks and various kinds of things. And they're detailed. They're small things compared to a lot of what you deal with on a week-to-week basis, certainly from your side of things. But from us, it is about the day-to-day operation of our businesses. So those kinds of things are important. The flower baskets. We do provide flower boxes for all of our members because everybody doesn't have an opportunity to hang flower baskets like they do down on 51st Street. But we do provide flower boxes, those kinds of things. If we can provide a voice as with your planning department, with your urban renewal department, as far as projects in that part of town, that I believe is probably one of the greatest values in terms of the events. Maintaining those and making sure that we're involved at an appropriate level. Again, that's something that is up for discussion by our association. So that's those kinds of things. And again, I think it goes down to the bottom line is if it's a value, if the businesses see value, then that's where we're at. And in terms of accountability and accountability of our downtown manager, our job description is written so that the job description can be a mirror image of the performance evaluation. And so we can go down the job description and look at the specifics and then talk about if there's, where things are being well done, where there may need to be strengths and that sort of thing.
Thank you.
Well, Bob, for me, I think something that Bama and your city manager need to look at, or city manager? Downtown manager. Downtown manager need to look at is the Taft Village core zoning. I think we're going on 15, 16 years on that, Richard. I'm looking to you. About 15 years ago that went into effect? Yeah. So, I mean, I don't think anyone's taken time to look back and say, okay, did we accomplish the goals we wanted to accomplish with that, or is it helping or hindering us? I know signage is one of the, for me, I used to have a place down there, and it's a big problem. That part of the town is prohibited from doing things that the rest of the town gets to do. So I think I would encourage you to get together with your merchants, your downtown manager, and then someone in planning and say, hey, here's what we think, and then maybe bring your recommendations forward.
Thank you.
That's it?
Covered it all.
Good, thank you.
Thank you.
Wish you the best of luck.
Thanks a lot.
I don't have an agenda in front of me.
I'll take it from here then.
Thanks.
So if you recall at our May 1st work meeting, we were talking about workforce housing, and we'd gone through all of the properties that the city has to determine how to proceed with those. There was another half to that we did not discuss, and Richard Townsend is prepared to do that. He's going to talk a little bit about what we have done as it pertains to workforce housing. We recently had a draft of the housing needs analysis that I had included and sent to you earlier. That won't officially become a document of the city as adopted until the general plan is done, but there's very good recommendations in there, and Richard's going to go over those. We also wanted to talk about the Lincoln Community Land Trust, and Allison is going to address those in particular. There is some information in the budget that also that would impact the budget. And then we have, over the last few weeks, we've had some preliminary discussions with a developer of affordable housing and workforce housing. He sent us a list of questions that are very pertinent questions. And for me, the best thing that came out of that was to get into the mind of a developer to see what it is they're actually looking for as a partnership with the city. And so I'll take a few minutes along with these two to just go over those a little bit.
I just wanted to hit some sort of highlights on what the planning department and the city in general has done or could do in the near future. Focusing first on things we can do at no cost to the city. These principally, the main thing we can do is allow increased density in order to reduce land costs, and it also would have the effect of reducing the cost of infrastructure. So what we have done, some of you have seen a lot of this, but we allow accessory dwelling units up to 750 square feet or 50% of the size of the main dwelling unit on the lot. Accessory dwelling unit is essentially a second dwelling unit on the same lot as a main dwelling. It's also known as like a mother-in-law flat, a granny flat, or whatever. It's a small unit. It can be standalone. It can be attached to the main dwelling. Could be in the basement if you have a basement. Could be in the attic. Just could be a separate room. Normally they have full cooking facilities. We allow a reduced parking requirement for accessory dwelling units, and because it's a second dwelling unit on the same lot, it ends up potentially doubling the allowed density in a particular area. The illustrations here, the one on the right is actually a accessory dwelling unit above a garage, and the drawing on the left is just an accessory dwelling unit attached to the main unit, the light colored part being accessory dwelling unit. We also allow cottage clusters of 4 to 12 units, 1,250 square feet for each unit or smaller. They are clustered around a central common area. They also have a reduced parking requirement depending on the size of the unit. And again, it doubles the allowed density because we allow them at a rate twice what we normally allow in the underlying zoning. And we also allow in all our commercial zones, allow mixed use, and actually in some areas we require it. Taft along 101 and along 51st Street, we require mixed use when redeveloping there. They can be, the typical thing you see is commercial on the ground floor and apartments above, but they can also be in like the commercial in front and the residential behind. They can be in separate buildings, in fact, on the same lot. I'm working with a developer right now on a property that already has some commercial office development on it, but they want to put apartments on it as well in separate standalone buildings near the hospital. We also allow in planned unit developments a density bonus where you can get, if you include 5% of your dwelling units are affordable dwelling units, you can get a density bonus of 10% more housing units than would normally be allowed. What that amounts to is giving another 5% housing units in order to essentially subsidize the 5% of affordable. And this is in planned unit developments. Some things that we haven't done yet but are looking at are what's called big houses is one of them. It looks like a regular house, a large one. This photograph actually is of a 4-unit house. You can see the 2 stairways going up. So there's 2 apartments above the ground floor, and then there's 2 on the sort of lower level there as well. They can be allowed at an increased density if that's the choice you make in adopting anything that would allow big houses. At the other end of the spectrum is tiny houses, and the intent of these is to reduce building costs. Just allowing tiny houses, which we do now. You can build a house of any size in Lincoln City, up to a certain amount of lot coverage and certain height, but you can build as small as you want on a lot right now. Many advocates of tiny houses, like the ones that are on wheels, that are on a trailer. The one on the left there is actually on a trailer. One of the big issues around tiny houses, the ones on trailers in particular, are they are not currently subject to any kind of code. So there are issues around their safety, things like egress. A lot of them have sleeping lofts, and without a reasonable sized way to get out of, a window to get out of the sleeping loft in the event of fire. Some of the people who like the idea of tiny houses on wheels like this, they're amateur builders. They don't know about plumbing, don't know enough about wiring, and they're not subject to code requirements. The State Building Codes Division has essentially washed their hands of them. They said if stick-built, site-built houses, even a tiny house on a foundation, is going to be subject to the state building codes. A manufactured home and a park model RV, such as the one on the right on this slide, that's a small RV under 400 square feet. Those are subject to the manufactured dwelling or RV standards. They're built in, they're manufactured in factories that are certified, inspected and certified, and they're built to code. The tiny houses that are on trailers, again, are not subject to either of those. And what they have done is that it's up to local governments to decide what they want to do about those. I should also add, we could allow them, in fact, I've started drafting an ordinance that would essentially allow them the same way we allow RVs now, which would have a density, would be allowed in commercial zones, allowed at a density of 1 per 1,200 square feet of property area. I believe the Lincoln County has recently allowed a tiny house development using their RV park standards for that.
Richard, if I could, would we be able to include those within the allowance for cars on churches? I believe we're allowed to have 3 vehicles spent as overnight stays on churches, as long as they provide sanitary facilities.
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that. It comes down to a lot of, is it accessory to the church? Is it a normal accessory? Would be the way it might be allowed. I think my greatest concern is safety. Churches are conditional uses, and there may be a point at which we get that tail wagging the dog thing, where if like 2 or 3 of them might be okay, but if you start thinking about more and more of them,
No, but right now, the state law, if I remember right, we were quoted, you can have 3 cars spending the night, up to 3 at churches. They're allowed that now, as long as you provide sanitation facilities for the people. So I'm just wondering if we could just easily say, well, it's on wheels, it's just, it falls under the same rubric.
Possibly.
Yeah, okay.
Another thing we can do that we're looking at is allow denser development of multifamily projects. Right now, our requirement is for the first 2 units, in order to calculate how many units you get for a multifamily, you take 8,000 square feet of lot area for the first 2, and then depending on whether it's in a commercial area or within a certain distance of a commercial area or not, if it's within so many feet of a commercial area, or in fact is commercial area, then it's 1 unit for 1,200 square feet. If it's outside that area, that proximity to commercial area, then it's 1 unit for every 2,250 square feet of lot area. One thing we could do that might allow more apartments on a given piece of land is to eliminate that 8,000 square feet for the first 2 and divide your lot area by 1,200 or by 2,250. Another option is to just treat them all as being within X distance of a commercial zone. Treat them the same way as if they were, so it'd be 1 unit for every 1,200 square feet. What usually is the issue on how many units you can get on a piece of property is the parking. You can get, it becomes an exercise in geometry on you want to do so many number of units, then you're going to figure out how to get the parking on. And it's like working with a puzzle, trying to figure out where things can be. And we also have a recreation space requirement, 250 square feet per unit. So fitting in the apartments, the parking and the recreation area can be challenging. But it's principally the parking that ends up limiting the number of units. And conceivably, you could go higher in a commercial zone. You can go to 45 feet, and that way you can get an additional floor of units in a commercial zone. But again, then you're still faced with the parking issue, and at 4 stories, you may end up having an elevator issue as well. So.
I just wanted to say, I probably sound like a broken record, but for the outdoor space, the recreation space, if these were sited close to a park, or if we're deficient in an area for a park and it's a good place for housing, for multifamily housing, if we put those together, they wouldn't have to have that burden, and it would be an incentive for them, and it would be good for the people who live there who had children or wanted to use outdoor space.
That's a possibility. That's a policy decision. It essentially amounts to the city or the state subsidizing the developer because the city or the state is providing the park. And that's a policy decision that you would have to make.
Mr. Townsend, I think it was last time we did the work session, you talked about multifamily and a different criteria for over, those real old folks, over 50 or 55.
Right.
Is that a policy we have? I guess where I'm wondering is, could a developer do a project exclusively for over 55, thus eliminating recreation space for the kids and maybe less parking?
What they get for over 55 right now is less parking. Instead of being 2 per unit, 2 parking spaces required per unit, it's 1 parking space per bedroom. So if it's a studio or a 1-bedroom, then it only has to have 1 parking space. As far as the recreation area, it's not just playground kind of recreation areas we're talking about. It's picnic areas, dog walking areas, what have you.
I guess I'm wondering is there a way to refine, continue to expand, density or development incentives for that over 55 group that you've
Sure,
thought
yeah,
about?
I'm sure
That you've thought about, that maybe we need to look at our ordinances and.
Yeah. I'm sure there are things we can do to expand that. As we know, the baby boomer generation is becoming more and more important in our economy. So we do need housing for that. So. Then there may be other things we can do that we can do at no cost for the city. We talked a little bit about parking requirements. We can presumably reduce them. Portland, very controversially, eliminated the parking requirements for multifamily, and they just park in the surrounding neighborhood. As you might imagine, it's quite controversial in the surrounding neighborhoods. But that's, there can be a reduced requirement or something. And it can be that, that leave it to the developer to decide how much parking they want to provide. Or we just have some really minimum, and they can provide more if they want, is one option.
Mr. Mayor? Yeah. I'm curious on these that have been done by other communities. Has it been shown that it actually, or do they build into it something that it will make sure that it's actually affordable housing? If you give up on things such as parking requirements, what guarantee does the city have that it will actually be affordable?
There would have to be a legal arrangement made through deed restrictions, contractually, development agreement, that kind of thing. It can be complex. There's no question of that. And it would take some creativity to make sure that we do have things. And like with the so-called elderly housing, we have the over 55. We approve a development, and they say, well, I'm going to have 50 units, and 20 of them are going to be under 55. In a large measure, that then becomes a leap of faith for the city to say, okay, that's fine, because we don't knock on doors and say, how old are you? I mean, we do say specific units are supposed to be designated for elderly, the over 55, but we don't really have an effective means of checking up on that.
I would like to respond to the reduced parking. I'm not in favor of that. If Councilor Hoagland was here, we would have a better accounting, but what I've heard is that the transportation other than having a vehicle isn't a real reliable source for getting around. And so for other communities, I think the ones that you're talking about in Portland, they're built on the light rail or next to a bus stop, and they have very regular, constant, reliable transportation. We don't have that here, so I'd really like us to step back before we dive into that type of thinking here.
Yeah, I'm just trying to throw out ideas of the possibilities.
Are you going to talk about other things like requirements for builders, like costs that they're incurring that are increasing, decreasing the likelihood of having affordable housing?
We don't require anything really beyond what the building code requires.
I'm thinking arborists and trees and things like that.
But we do require landscaping.
But do we require a certified arborist to come in and we say?
Maybe we can look at that. We've had
just little things.
Situation with another development, not multifamily, where the arborist essentially killed the project. So, we need to take a close look at that.
Yeah.
One thing that would be helpful as you consider these things, that is in your experiences or in your discussions with people who've had experiences, things such as an arborist, there's some things that you can come across. If you can send that information to us, then it helps us from trying to think that we need to guess what it is somebody's thinking. And so if there are regulations that you're seeing, that you're aware of, that are increasing the costs, then send us a note and let us know so that we have those on the radar and can make sure we consider those.
Rich, can I count on you for that?
Yes.
No, that Rich
Oh,
back
that
there,
Rich.
Mr. Briggs. He'll send me a list.
Yes. So you know what I was referring to.
Oh, Rich, no, we can't do it from the audience. Nah, thanks, though. But get a hold of him when you're done. Yeah.
Mr. Townsend, we just put in 2 big apartment complexes. I don't know how many units there were. Do you know?
I think the total was about 84
With both combined?
total, yeah, for the 2 of them.
So how do we know when that demand has been sated, when we've accomplished our goal?
When we start having vacancies, I think. I know that there's still a very substantial demand. I've met with a number of developers on a number of different proposals, and some of which I think will come to fruition in the not-too-distant future. We did do the buildable lands inventory housing needs assessment, which you will be getting in a hearing in June next month. But it talks about, I think, a need for, I don't remember the exact numbers, over the next 20 years, about 450 apartments. I think that depending on how you want to look at how people want to live in the future, in other words, that is essentially taking present trends and going out. There may be a need for more, but I think there's clearly people could build a couple hundred more and not worry about having vacancies at this point.
Well, so we hear about affordable housing and we hear about workforce housing, but I haven't seen a lot about retirement housing and how we're going to mix the retired community in with the working community, which I think is a process that we need to look at rather than just jumping here, jumping there.
When we're looking at affordability, we're looking at, it's sometimes referred to it as workforce housing, but really it's using that term is to distinguish it from the subsidized housing. But we're looking at the the median income. And whether it's from employment or whether it's from Social Security or something, that's what it's designed to address, is the income level, not the source of the money.
Well, I guess what I'm asking, is there going to be a way to integrate the different types of housing so you don't have just blocks of one kind? Does that make sense? So for example, you might have a house that's designed for the needs of someone that's retired. That'd be one story. You can plug those in. But also, don't you think an effort should be made to introduce another type of housing that might be young worker housing, and so that the older folks could share their knowledge with the younger folks, maybe do babysitting, and so you really have an interactive community that helps each other rather than just a bunch here and a bunch over there.
Yeah, I mean, I guess there are ways to encourage that through regulation, but also things like the cottage clusters certainly allow that to happen. And, they would often include a community building, not in the sense of building community, but a building for that community, where you can have activities, you can have daycare in some of them, that kind of thing. You can have communal meals. There are people who do actively develop those kinds of things, and it's often the prospective residents who are doing it themselves that put those things together. And say, we want to have an intentional community or whatever of mixed age and that kind of thing. One other thing we can look at is what's called universal design, where the architectural barriers aren't there. Like the door handles are not the twist kind. You can push. There's no stairs. The halls and everything, doors are wide enough for like a wheelchair. So it's be useful for people at all stages of their life. And you're seeing more and more of it. You think of like the Bi-Mart store is built to universal design. There's no step to go up into it. You just go straight in. Those kinds of things can accomplish at least something towards what you're talking about. Whether it's the city's job to require that kind of age inclusion or not, it could be done. I think if you would do apartments, you have to include X number of elderly units, which actually you get a benefit for because you have less parking requirement. It's a possibility.
Okay. Yeah, just coincidentally, I had written down cottage clusters. People that are looking for affordable housing are buying small because that's all they can afford. The older people are downsizing, so they have small as well. Kind of a thing they have in common, so you can make the community, the cottage clusters, make them work together.
Yeah. I know some of us who are older and don't have kids are thinking it'd be great to live in a development where there's younger people who can take care of us.
Just have to dial 911. Thank you.
Okay. There are other things we can do that are at cost to the city. We hear a number of them frequently. We can reduce or waive or defer permit fees, particularly building permit fees. Same thing for system development charges or property taxes. And as I say, there's two snags there, and Mr. Chandler brought up the first one, is how do you make sure that the benefits of those reductions or waivers or whatever accrue to the residents and not just to the person who builds them or the first resident. You want to keep it in the affordability range for a reasonable period of time. And again, that can be done through deed restrictions, through development agreements, and Things like, I know what's, I don't know if Allison can add anything on that, on what's done with the land trust, and how they handle the affordability, because I think it's in the deeds. And so, the other snag is, my father-in-law, called Perry's Law of Conservation of Problems. If you don't charge people for SDCs, don't charge property taxes, or don't charge permit fees, or reduce them, you may be solving one problem, but you're creating another. And so you're only exchanging one problem for another. And it's how do you pay for the sewer system if you don't charge houses, new houses for it? How do you pay for government in general if there's no property taxes or reduced property taxes? So that's just deciding largely whether the community as a whole properly should be subsidizing some of these things.
I've heard of something called deferred improvement agreements. What does that mean? Does that have impact on this?
That's typically, we have a requirement when you build a new house, you have to put in curb, gutter, sidewalk, and half-street improvements. We have so many areas without like curb, gutter, and sidewalk in particular, requiring some infill property to put in curb, gutter, and sidewalk without having a design for the whole street. You can end up with things at all kinds of different levels. It doesn't make sense from an engineering standpoint. So what we have done in the past is allow people to sign a deferred improvement agreement saying that they don't have to pay for those things now, but when we could decide to put in the curb, gutter, and sidewalk in your neighborhood, you got to pay your fair share. What we're doing right now is actually trying to get away from that and just having people essentially pay the fees now, and when the time comes, we'll put in the curb, gutter, and sidewalk. You don't have to pay anything. So it would go into the cost of the house. The same thing as it does now, where if you put in curb, gutter, and sidewalk in a new development, that is reflected in the cost of the house.
So the owner would pay that, or the developer, or?
The developer would pay for it first, and then obviously they pass that through to the owner, the first owner, because it adds value to the house. Some other things that are possibilities, you can expedite approval of affordable housing projects. One thing is to have pre-approved plans. Actually, I've put in the proposed budget some funding to have plans drawn up for affordable houses, a nice design, that if someone decides, if a builder decides they want to build an affordable house, they can pick one of those designs. It's already approved. They don't have to pay the permit fees for that, or at least they get reduced permit fees. It will go through very quickly because it doesn't require so much plan review. It's really just looking, is it properly sited on the lot, and is the stormwater and the public works things handled properly. It can speed things up a bit, so it gives an expedited process and a reduced cost. Don't even have to pay a designer because it's already designed. Don't have to pay the plan review fees necessarily, that kind of thing. So it speeds things up. And as we know, time is money in building. So if there's one thing I hear from builders all the time, it's wish things could be approved faster, and this is a way of approving faster.
So, Mr. Sorry. Yeah.
Jump right in.
I'm curious, because you had that focus groups or whatever with contractors and developers, and we're looking at, I thought, processes. So we wave a magic wand, and now you have expedited approval process. Well, besides telling me that they just jumped to the front of the line, what does expedited process mean? I mean, what would it look like? How would it really be expedited? And why don't we do it just as regular business?
I'm sorry, what's the...
Why don't we do it just as, put that as the new norm?
we can't put everybody at the front of the line. So it's a decision that these go to the front of the line. Every building permit, like for a new house, has to get building plan review, public works review, and planning review. If it's already been approved by the building department for that's up to code, then that takes a few days out at least, so that can help things. And then it's a policy decision, put it at the front of the line.
I'd just like to say I really like this idea. I do have a little bit of a apprehensive feeling, though, that we'll end up with the same houses for every
that's
block.
that's one of the reasons I wanted in the budget. What I'm thinking of is not one design, but I'm thinking of 3 or 4, and they can be. You can do a lot of things with one plan. You can do mirror images. How you trim it, the details on it can make a difference too. I mean, there are places where you got same house, same house, same house, same house, same house, and we have one place in Lincoln City, and there was one developer built 8 houses, boom, 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 and it's just, they're all the same. And I've seen places in Wilsonville. There's a development called Villebois, where they require. The developers came in, I mean, they're big developers, and they required to vary their designs in certain ways. So, but I understand your concern. That's why you're not doing just one or two, but trying to have at least 3 that people can choose from. And of course, nobody has to use any of them, but this is just another tool that we're putting out there for people.
And Richard, how are we doing with I guess within the process, so folks could verify things online? Are we still having to do everything by hand at the front desk? Well, can someone check where their plans are at online?
Yes.
In the process, they can say,
Yeah.
okay, you pass from here to here to here, and
Yeah.
everything's being transmitted
As far as I know,
electronically?
people can go online to our Acela e-permitting program and see exactly where things are. I'll double check on that, make sure that.
Nothing within that process that's slowing things down. So I'm asking, do we have any hitches that, well, we got to hand carry it over to here, or vice versa?
Well, we used to make people come in. They would give it to Public Works, and they would actually have to come in and pick it up and take it to planning. And we don't require that anymore. We'll take it to, we'll pick them up ourselves, that kind of thing. So, and there was a reason for it, and probably a good reason at the time we had that system. But we don't do that anymore. And, in fact, we have been more flexible on the order that they go into, where if one of the 3 is not available in the normal order, we'll basically run the risk and send it to one of the other 2, so that it can be processed along.
Okay, thanks.
Until recently, inclusionary zoning was illegal in Oregon, and the legislature in the last session allowed inclusionary zoning, and that is a requirement that, in some developments, that there be affordable housing units. This is, it's for multifamily developments of 20 units or more. You can require a 20% affordable housing inclusions. Last week or week before last, I was at a planners conference, and what I was hearing is that there's going to be a lot of 19-unit apartment developments coming along. But you can require up to 20, if it's 20 units or more, you can require up to 20% affordable housing, but you have to provide incentives if you do that. Reduced property taxes or deferred property taxes and other incentives as well. So it's not a pure exaction, but the incentives may not be enough. I'm not sure. It may not be enough to make it attractive to builders to have that. One other thing that the law allowed is to have an in lieu payment rather than building affordable units. Just make a payment of a certain amount to go into an affordable housing fund. There's that kind of thing is possible through the inclusionary zoning. And other things we can do is extending infrastructure to make building more affordable. Right now, we've got the draft Buildable Lands Inventory and Housing Needs Assessment. What it says as far as the amount of residential land that we need versus how much we have almost 5 times as much undeveloped, buildable, residentially zoned land within the urban growth boundary as we are projected to need for the next 20 years. Land is there. What is not there in a lot of cases is sewer and water. And it's not cheap to extend those things. Typically what happens is you'll get incremental extension as a developer decides they want to develop a site. They extend water and sewer into that, and then the next developer extends water and sewer. It's not that easy. We have some places where it can be done relatively easily, some places where it's going to be difficult. The east side of the lake is a good example. I know that we've been looking at extending sewer over there. There's already water there. Extending sewer over there would open up a lot of that land for affordable development. I mean, right now it's basically not affordable for anybody because of the sewer cost. Or it doesn't make sense to develop it because what is allowed ends up eating a lot of land. So if there's a decision made, one thing that can be done is to extend the infrastructure, essentially absorb those costs so that the developer doesn't have those huge front-end costs. Example of that, of what the city's done recently, is the West Devils Lake Road pump station. It was about $1 million, thank you. And it meant that in the north end of town, the villages, Lincoln Palisades, in that area, right now, that pump station was maxed out. Essentially, the next house that was going to be built would have to, pay to expand the pump station. So you're talking, probably $1 million is what we spent on it, and so it would basically prevent further development up there. So the Urban Renewal Agency and the city took that on, and so there is land, like in Lincoln Palisades in particular, that can be developed economically now. I'm not saying as affordable housing, but it can be developed economically. So. We also have city-owned land that can be sold at a reduced cost. Again, with the provisions for making sure that those savings the property stays affordable. Again, be given away if that decision is made, so that we do have that tool as a possibility. And we can do development ourselves, too. There's a couple of sites that staff is looking at as possible places for workforce housing that we can work, maybe not just ourselves, but with other large employers to provide housing. I don't know why that's there. And then just talking about the housing needs assessment. I believe you've got copies of it. The housing affordability, there's 3 pages of recommendations and policies on housing affordability. And I've hit the highlights on several slides here. One is explore innovative approaches to system development charges. Now we have just a standard for a residence. This is what it costs you for system development charges for water and sewer. Some places are going to, it's based on the number of fixtures that you have or on your square footage, so that a 5,000 square foot house pays more than a 1,500 square foot house, which is not the case now. Expedited review, we've talked about that, that we're looking at that with regard to the affordable housing, property tax exemptions. This is just their list of minimized parking requirements. It talked about facilitate development through a local accelerator. That's basically getting everybody together, getting the lenders together with the developers and the owners to try to just get everybody on the same page, get together with the city, and we can just make things go through. One of the problems I believe people are having is finding lenders, particularly for larger projects. You know, we don't have the absorption rate for large projects here. We build in a normal year 50, 60 new houses a year. And so someone coming in and doing a large development is taking a risk. It's got to be a piecemeal kind of thing. You see, Olivia Beach is a good example. It's taking years for them to go along, but they don't build spec houses. They build, someone buys the land, and they build the house for them. And it takes time, but it also reduces the risk to the builder. Being able to pull people together to do that kind of thing is a good possibility. They talk about prioritize infrastructure projects that support affordable housing, and that's just deciding if we're going to extend water and sewer, streets, or whatever, where they're going to be, and whether they're going to be in areas that would be helpful to affordable housing, close to employment, for example, kinds of things. And then grants or loans to reduce cost, whether it would be to the probably would be to the resident as opposed to the developer. But I guess it could be for the developer as well to reduce costs if we have those protections that those costs get passed on and then preserved. They say work with major employers on housing for their employees. That's the thing I've been talking about, where maybe us and the school district and the hospital work together on a project for their employees. Explore public-private nonprofit ventures to preserve or develop affordable units, and that's just basically getting people together and people saying we're putting our resources into this.
Well, it seems to me, Richard, that the city has proven that works. That if we have a few rental properties available for new employees,
right,
you get them settled, then they have time to find a place, and it would seem to me something that these other employers could look at easily and do.
Then you're saying basically go out and look for funding options. And there's a range of possibilities. I don't know with the new Congress, new policies, I'm not sure if some of those are going to dry up. We'll see what happens on that. And another possibility is to establish a nonprofit development corporation to actually do the development, maybe in partnership again with other organizations. Establish and fund an affordable housing program to increase supply. One of the things that some of the recent state legislation has allowed is the imposition of a construction excise tax, like the school excise tax that was passed a number of years ago, where there's just a flat fee per square foot that is charged on new development, which then goes into an affordable housing fund.
So we make the house less affordable to get more affordable houses?
Essentially, yes.
Okay.
I mean, it's talking like $1 a square foot or something. So it's less than a 1% increase. I agree with you. There's some irony there.
Just is always a scary word to me.
There's a little irony there. I understand.
Yeah. Okay.
It amounts essentially to everybody subsidizing affordable housing, whether it's if we extend infrastructure ourselves, that's everybody else is paying for that too, so, in your taxes. So. And then regarding regulations, they said consider inclusionary zoning. I talked to you about that. Pre-approved designs, I talked to you about that, and zoning code for barriers. We can certainly do more of that. You've made some good suggestions, and if you've got more, I'd be happy to take a closer look at
I just
it.
have one big question is if we have the land, and I know some of it isn't ready because of the sewer, we have the desire, we have the people who want to rent, why aren't these being built? Why don't we see more apartments going up here?
Good question. I'm not convinced that the city has any barriers to it. They may be just people maybe aren't experienced in apartment development. Most of the builders here are building, one house or a few single-family homes at a time. And maybe it's just a matter of figuring the way it pencils, it's just not worth it for them. I don't know. Like I say, I think the city does the opposite of putting up barriers. We work hard with developers who want to come in and build apartments to help the project along, to make suggestions, to try to accommodate what they want to do in a way that would make it conform with our ordinance requirements. And our ordinance requirements, maybe with the exception of the arborist, are I think far from onerous. When I get experienced developers from other areas that come in, I can't tell how many times they say, that's it? That's all we have to do? And I mean, they're happy to deal with us. I see the skeptical look on your face, and I know I'm feeling you're thinking about a particular person.
No, I'm just thinking about exactly what you just said. It just, to me, it's as a capitalist. I mean, if the money's there and I can have it done and there's no one getting in my way, I'm going there. And so I'm still just trying to figure out what is it.
Well,
is it because they're in demand somewhere else?
You might figure that if you make more money per your unit of cost than building a single-family house.
Yeah, see, I don't know that. So that's the question I'm asking is what is it that, and maybe you can't answer that.
Yeah.
And I know that, it's in one of these things, maybe we just don't have enough people who can swing a hammer in this state too. I was out in Bend, and I keep bringing up Bend, but I mean, everywhere I turn, there's houses being built and apartments being built. I'm just wondering if we have a shortage of builders who can actually come out here.
Well, one of the things I know that the mobilization cost to build something here is much higher than it
my
is
next question.
like in Portland or something. Because you think of that we have land, we have opportunities, we have a demand, but maybe somebody from Portland or Salem looking at it is they can figure, okay, I can build here, but where do my workers live? Where do I put them up for the 6 months we're building or whatever? And that can be a real deterrent.
I think part of it also is financing. Richard mentioned that we don't have a lot of builders that are local that do multifamily. And so for a builder who is maybe wanting to stretch into that market, they just don't have the track record that the banks feel comfortable with in order to get the financing needed for those larger projects. So I think that's also part of we're just in a tough market.
Yeah. A lot of the lenders who typically lend on multifamily have no experience with the coast, too. So.
And the other thing is, sorry to interrupt, but when it comes to single-family housing, I think we have the same situation with multifamily, that if a builder can build a higher-end market-level apartment unit, they would rather do that than build something that's affordable. So same thing, if someone's given a lot to build a single-family home, they want to really maximize their profit rather than create something that's more to an affordable.
And that's why I think at some point we've got to decide as a city how much we're going to step in and subsidize that, because we've drawn kind of a number that said 450 units would be optimal, right, to satisfy the need. Well, obviously we're not going to subsidize all of that. But at some point we can say, look, for this extended period of time until we reach this unit level, for the benefit of the city and the citizens, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and we're going to bite it, the costs, or we're going to subsidize it in some manner until we reach that level. And then we say, okay, we're back to regular business because we don't have people, living in their cars who want to work here. Which is extreme, I understand. But
So on this same wavelength, can we go back a slide? Another slide.
Pardon me?
Go back another
Pardon me?
one. That last bullet.
Right?
Maybe that would get to some of what the mayor was saying about making it less attractive to build here. Because if we did it ourselves in a unique way that had maybe had an end date, so something like that might work.
Yeah, that's a possibility, and another is the second dot point on there is where basically we work together with getting everybody together, getting the finance people together. Where if it's hard to get finance people here, we can reach out to them to get the finance people here, get experienced developers here. And it's just, the cost is the staff time. But I mean, that's a policy decision.
So within that, are you looking for council to say do it? Or can you put together some options to bring to council and we'll say, go ahead?
I think it would be good if some of the things look attractive to you is for you to say, look into it and see what the real costs are going to be, what the feasibility of some of these things are.
Well, it seems an option that I'd be interested in at least hearing.
Am I Ron, am I saying things right? Yeah.
Okay.
I think that's all I have. So.
Before we jump into a discussion of the community land trust, I'm going to move something ahead just because it fits so well. These will all sound very familiar, but as I mentioned earlier, Councilors Hinton and Casper and Richard and I have been in discussions with a developer on affordable housing. And he had some questions of the city, and the questions are telling. They're very similar to what we've just heard. What will your city do to lower the cost and time frame of developing affordable housing? Will your city provide exceptions to minimum lot coverage? Will your city provide community development options, multiple residences on one site? What will your city allow regarding to another, I'm sorry, let me read that. What will your city allow for shared common space and shared residential occupancy style units? Do you have land to donate? Are there any funding sources for different levels of median family income rent rates? Can your city provide an expedited permit process or at least a fast-track program for reproduced projects? Can your city waive property improvements of city resources such as sidewalks, streets, storm systems, et cetera? So very similar to what we've heard. This came from a developer who is looking at our market as a possible site for workforce housing. And the next part that we wanted to give you an update on, and this is Allison who'll carry the load on this one, is to talk about the actions that are taking place with the Lincoln Community Land Trust.
Yeah, I'd like to back up just a little bit and tag on to what Richard had presented. A couple things that the Urban Renewal Agency can do in terms of workforce housing. We do have as part of our project list how we can spend money is to partner with developers on workforce housing. We also, as you know, have done a lot of infrastructure improvements, including the West Devils Lake Road Pump Station, which Richard mentioned, which would help provide more development opportunity in the north end of town. And of course, as you all know, we, with the current Urban Renewal District, we're approaching the end of the funding. And so until the agency decides how to use that funding, we can't promise anything. But again, that's on your list as a possible way to partner on workforce housing. So I wanted to mention that. I also wanted to mention We kind of dabbled a little bit. Mr. Ward, you mentioned something about mixed income communities, and if the city were to develop workforce housing through some nonprofit or for-profit developer, that's something that you could include in that kind of, Richard mentioned deed restrictions. There are ways that you can accomplish that objective when you do development. And definitions of workforce housing, we keep talking about workforce housing, affordable housing. Every house is affordable to someone. So we really want to focus on, who are we trying to serve? Workforce housing definition typically is for those earning between 60% and 120% of median family income, and that's county median family income. Mostly the land trust is who focuses on workforce housing market. In Lincoln County, annually for a family of 4, 60% of median family income is about $33,000, and for 120% of median family income for Lincoln County, it's about $66,000. Again, that's for a family of 4. Affordable housing is housing that costs less than 30% of a household's income, and that includes utilities. And another term that we use is cost burden. So cost burden results for those households spending more than 30% of their income for housing expense, which is a good percentage of people nationwide. Again, this is not a problem unique to Lincoln City. Housing need exists when a household cannot find housing for purchase or rent that is consistent with her household characteristics. So size, composition, or within commute distance from work, and that is affordable. The HUD 2015 income limits are for median family income of 100% value for family of 4, and this is what sets the determination for federal subsidies. For Oregon, it's $62,600. For Lincoln County, it's $57,800, and for Lincoln City, it's $49,000, roughly. So you can see the difference between the state and then Lincoln City's. Very low income limit is 80%. Low income limit is 80%, very low income is 50%, and extremely low income limit is 30%. So there's a lot of terminology I'm throwing out and percentages of incomes, but when we start talking about subsidy and who's subsidizing and who the developer is, really these are the terms that they're looking at to see what subsidies there are and how to match that up with what the property is and what the city or urban renewal is able to do with offering to help partner with that development. I also wanted to mention in 2015 there's some information that I have on local salaries, and the school district average salary range for preschool is $21,000 a year and $62,000 for high school, so that's quite a big range. For Samaritan North Lincoln Hospital, the average salary is $36,000, and that's across all employees. And for Lincoln County service industry, which is often part-time, seasonal, it includes accommodations, food services, leisure, hospitality. And this was actually a figure that we got from the 2011 Lincoln County Workforce Housing Needs Assessment, which was good to offer some information regarding decisions that you all made about the Lincoln Community Land Trust, and preceded, obviously, the work that the planning department's doing on the comp plan. And those numbers are about 13,000 to 17,000. Again, mostly part-time and seasonal work. And those are all for households of 1. So taking the full range of local salaries, just to, if you're a household of 1 and you are in the service industry and you have 1 part-time job, maybe you're making $13,000 a year, your per year housing costs are about $4,000, which means monthly you can afford $336. If you are $21,000, like we mentioned, the school district for a preschool teacher, you can afford about $525 a month. Or a home, if you could find a home for sale for $37,000. These are all, again, households of 1. $36,000 a year is about $10,000 per year housing costs, which is $900 a month. And if you were to be working for $36,000 a year, household of one, you could find a home for sale, assuming you can qualify, for $123,000. $62,000 a year, you can afford about $1,550 a month, and a home price that you would be able to meet for that 30%, remember we're looking at 30%, so people are not cost burdened, is $263,000. So I just wanted to provide a little background on where we're at in terms of income and workforce housing. We talk about workforce housing. Mr. Ward, you also mentioned retirees. There are a lot of retirees who work part-time jobs as well. So there's a lot of crossover with the markets that we're trying to serve.
I can interrupt too. You may remember as part of the VRD process with the studies that we did, there was one on housing, and some of the conclusions from that was that I think about half of our owners are cost burdened, and I think it's about 60% of renters are cost burdened. In other words, they pay more than 30% of their income for this. It's to meet the definition of affordability is a real challenge across the board.
Yeah.
I remember going to school and then just starting out. We all took roommates. I mean, this isn't a new problem. I don't know, 40 years ago, if the person fresh out of school trying to get a job somewhere isn't going to be cost burden. We had, 5 people in a 2-bedroom house, and we didn't feel very burdened at all. It's just a recognition of where we stood economically. I don't know if that matters to anyone, but I thought I'd bring it up. Fernwood, isn't it Fernwood that has, how many spaces are there in Fernwood available?
I think there's 64 lots there right now.
And are they all have streets, sidewalks, water, sewer?
The street has been roughed in that it's been graded and there's rock. The water and sewer lines are in, and there are conduits for the wire utilities.
So we've got a big investment in those, getting those lot ready, right?
Right.
So my question is, I guess, have mercy on me, is what's to stop us from building a 600 square foot cabin and plopping it on those lots that we've already got invested in? Because, we got a knowledge-based economy, and most of those people stand to be transferred across the state or find another opportunity in the first few years, so they're really not interested in buying anything. So what would be wrong with putting cabins, 60 cabins? I mean, you could have, we see the big, Adair Homes build the 60 little cabins.
There's probably nothing wrong with it in the broadest sense. There still would be substantial costs in infrastructure for doing that, because the streets need to be finished, the curb, gutter, and sidewalks need to be put in, the wire utilities need to be put in. There needs to be decisions on if that's what we want there. That's sort of the front door to the Villages at Cascade Head property, and depending on how we want to see that the whole property develop over the future, there's decisions that need to be made on that, exactly what we want there. Now, we've kicked off developing a new preliminary master plan for the Villages, and should have that before the end of the year, and have a good plan, and then make decisions on individual spots and what we want to have happen there.
And I don't mean to belabor it, but if you did that and rented them, the rent revenue alone would pretty much pay for the cabins themselves. Market would be $600. You'd have a line at the door waiting to rent one, and, you know, $800 or $900, you probably would too. And that'd be a lot of income that you could use to build more.
Well, you know, a small house, the cost of building a small house, the cost per square foot is higher than the cost per square foot of building a big house, because you've got, for a small house, you still have to have the kitchen and the bathroom facilities and those kinds of things. So it's not necessarily, you think, well, we build something small, like a tiny house, it's going to be, if it's half the size, it's going to cost half as much. That's not necessarily true. And then there's the associated infrastructure costs that have to be put in up front. So some analysis would need to be done on that to see whether what you're saying would be borne out.
It's not out of the question, though? Or, yeah?
I don't know. A lot it depends on the cost of money, but it might be a possibility. So, but some analysis would need to be done.
Thanks.
I think one thing, and it's not for you, but it's for everyone to remember, is the line between home ownership and renting. If you want to buy a home, well, you make the decision and you go find it and you take care of it. If you want to be a renter, being a renter requires a landlord. And as we move forward with more and more renters' rights, as I see going through the legislation, it becomes less and less attractive to be a landlord. And I think that pool is starting to dry up. Again, I go back to the example of myself and my wife. We looked into it again, and as we looked at the laws, unless I can pretty much easily double or triple my money and hire a nice lawyer on retainer, I'm not going back into that business. It's just, it's almost lopsided, the liability there to be a landlord. Again, just kind of throwing it out, it's something the public needs to be aware of. The tighter you restrict that, the less you're going to have people wanting to enter that market, and then you'll have less rental properties available. That it?
I'm going to move along. If you're ready, we can talk about others who are doing Lincoln City housing. We have Habitat for Humanity, and they create home ownership opportunities for low-income households that are 60% of the median family income and below. And for Lincoln County, again, this is annual income of no more than about $44,000 for a family size of 8. Homes are resold at the owner initiative at market rate, and home affordability is lost after the first resale. We have Northwest Coastal Housing, otherwise known as the Community Development Corporation of Lincoln County, and they are a nonprofit doing property management, for example, the Ridge Apartments in Lincoln City, and they also do housing development. We have the Housing Authority of Lincoln County. They're a nonprofit that provides affordable housing options in Lincoln County. They administer HUD choice vouchers and operate and manage homes in Newport, Waldport, and Yachats for underserved populations, which are low-income seniors and people with disabilities. And we also have the CSC, or Community Services Consortium, for Lynn, Benton, and Lincoln County. They have an office in Newport. And they are a nonprofit community action agency to combat poverty. That's their main mission. Priorities include job and financial help, quality education training, adequate food and nutrition, safe, decent, and affordable housing. Some services include Head Start, Food Share, WorkSource Oregon, WeCare, Weatherization, Career Tech Charter School. And they have housing services that include rental assistance, utility assistance, housing education, weatherization, and housing services for veterans. So they have a pretty wide set of activities that they engage in, including housing.
Just have a question. I'm becoming frustrated, and I thought I should say that. You both are presenting some very interesting information to us, and I don't have anything to look at. And as I take notes, I'm missing what you're saying. So can we get copies of what you're saying?
Absolutely.
So I'm just really getting frustrated. Okay, thanks.
Yes, sorry about that. And this is just really a brief, just to let you know that, the city's doing things on housing, Urban Renewal is doing things on housing, and there are others besides us that are working on addressing the housing issue. Last but not least, I'll mention the Lincoln Community Land Trust with Mr. Chandler asked that I address that. I am on the board for this nonprofit, And similar to Habitat for Humanity, they create home ownership opportunities. And however, this is for workforce households that are 60 to 120% of median family income. And for Lincoln County, this is about 23,000 up to 46,000. That's for family size of 1. And it could be, if you have a family size of 8, which is not often but can happen, then it's about 87,000, which would be the upper income limit to purchase a land trust home. The way the land trust works, homes are basically you purchase the home and then you lease the land. So there are other properties, for example, Salishan homes. You purchase the home and not the land. So this works similarly to that. You rent or lease the land from the land trust, and so the land basically is held by the land trust. It helps removing the cost of the land from the home purchase means that the home can be more affordable. And
Allison, if I could interrupt, just because
Sure.
I haven't dealt with that very much. Taxes on that, then how do you apportion taxes on something like that?
Yeah, so the homeowner is responsible to pay all the property taxes because they have full use.
Land and improvements.
Yes, the land and the improvements, because they have full use of the land. That's one of the main objections with the land trust, or kind of hurdles in education, is that you can do an addition to the home, you can plant a garden, you can build a fence, as long as you're meeting the city code and requirements, getting permits and such, but you basically have full rights to the land other than timber rights or mineral rights, the things that are, really more longer term or inherent economic benefits to leasing the land. So it just helps. It's kind of like a subsidy by removing the cost of the land and the land trust just holding that land. And what this means then is that the home stays affordable forever as long as the land trust continues to own the land, which it always intends to do. And the home can be sold whenever the homeowner wants to sell it. So there aren't any rules about that. There is what we call revenue sharing or a shared equity model, which means as the homeowner is in the home over time and equity is built, then they don't get the full windfall of that equity. They get a portion of it, and the land trust gets a portion of it. So you're using the land, you're owning the home, and then when you sell it, you share whatever equity has been built. So there are 2 homes in the land trust portfolio, and one of them was a renovation and the other was new construction. Richard mentioned universal design. I'm a big fan of universal design, so I'm glad you brought that up. The second home for the land trust, which is, as I mentioned, new construction, was built using universal design standards, and the land trust does have what would you call it? A policy. They have a policy for green building, and they have a policy for universal design, which are more guidelines than requirements, but just kind of suggest to the person who's building the home that we do want to see these so that more people can use the home if it is sold to someone who needs those things. So that is a little bit about the land trust. I will mention that you all are part of a three-party MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, with the Land Trust and with City of Newport and with the county. And that 3-year MOU was to provide 3 years of funding to participate in the operations of that land trust. And that funding is, we've reached the 3rd year of the funding, and what's happened is the land trust has not spent as much as it anticipated spending, so there is some reserve. And we can go into this more if you have questions as a budget committee, but for the 5:30 meeting, if we get to it. And City of Newport is going to request some revisions to that MOU in order to use the reserve funding to actually build projects rather than use it just for operations. So I don't have that language on the MOU revision now. As soon as Newport has their language, then I will get that and we'll run it through Mr. Chandler and the city attorney before we bring it to you. In the budget, we do have a request for $15,000 for operations, and that is to continue participating with the land trust, but not, again, not as part of that MOU. The excess funding that is reserve or just excess from the 3 years would go for projects that would be either buyer-initiated grants, where the land trust would find a buyer and find a home, and then use that money to help connect the buyer to the home. So it would be more like using an existing home in a renovation. If there were things that were needed in that case, then the home could be purchased. The buyer would know what home it is, and then that's how that transaction would be made. The land would go into the land trust, and the home would be sold to the buyer. And then the other ways that the excess funding could be used is for land purchase or new construction or subsidy that would be needed to fill the gap between the $130,000, which you all have in the city budget that's been used as a revolving loan fund. So the first 2 homes really were made possible by a federal program called the Neighborhood Stabilization Program. And there was money given to communities that had a certain number of foreclosures per capita. And Toledo and Lincoln City were the only cities in Lincoln County that made that requirement. And so the parcel was purchased, the home was renovated, and fortunate enough, the property was large enough to divide it and do a new construction project right next door to the renovation. So that is how we have 2 homes, and they both are in Lincoln City. And the Land Trust is looking to do more homes in the near future. So I can answer any questions you have on the Land Trust or on the housing information that we presented.
Mr. Mayor, I just have one other thing, that this was some information that was sent to us, an article about Dublin, California, and a development that they did. It was very interesting reading, and I just was... That completes our presentation on the workforce housing. Is there any questions that you have that we have not yet discussed?
Can I just add one thing which I forgot to mention, and this was, we talked a little bit about like how the city has 3 houses that we use for incoming employees to give them time to find housing that they would rent on a long-term basis or buy or whatever. And our director of our planning commission made what I thought was a really good suggestion. We've got about 1,500 second homes that sit here vacant most of the year. And it might be worth trying to see if some of them would be willing to make their homes available for 3, 4, 6 months in one particular year or something for transitional housing for new employees coming in for other organizations in town. It wouldn't be a permanent commitment or anything, but it would just be, you know, a way for them to make a little income off the house and not have the overnight issue, but just provide transitional housing for new employees on an as-needed basis. I thought that was a pretty cool idea.
Yeah, and something that's come before, is there anything standing in the way of dormitories in the city?
No, we have something we call boarding houses that are called out as an allowed use. And there's no like density requirement or anything on that. The women's shelter is a good example of that, where we authorize that under the boarding house.
Would be like a shared kitchen and facilities. Okay. Seems to me the casino and the college should have something, because they do have a bit of a transitory employment or use, and it would sure be nice just to have something short-term for people to use. Okay. That's it for me. Thanks. Is that it?
Well, we were going to talk about economic development, but we were also going to finish at 4:30.
Yeah.
And so if you want to move that to another work meeting, that would be fine. If you want to continue on for 15 more minutes, then what I would suggest that we do is just talk about I think it's 5 properties that the city owns that are in commercial areas, and where we are and what we're doing as far as going forward with those properties.
Okay, knock that out in 15 minutes.
I think we could. So Allison's going to lead the charge on this, so if you'll talk about those properties then, and with the rest of that, we'll schedule for another day.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. So this is basically a quick version of what the properties are, and 4 of them being urban renewal properties that have you all have been directing us to move forward with development. And actually, I have a memo from April about property development. I went to Portland and visited with some developers and other government development professionals to talk with them about where we are in our development process and where we're trying to go. And so that is a memo just kind of summarizing what I learned. And that memo is what forms the basis of where we're at on these particular properties. So the first one, and this also, these map numbers are associated with the last work session that we had on the city-owned properties when we were talking about workforce housing and what properties the city has and which ones might be good for whichever purpose, whether housing or not, maybe to fund future housing. And so this map number 4 is referring to that earlier presentation, and this is the Northwest 15th Street property in Ocean Lake. It's a little less than 1/4 of an acre. It's not a very large piece of property, but it is pretty critical to help switch over the use of that street from mostly residential to more mixed use by incorporating commercial or mixed use development. And where we are on that property is the next steps would be to apply for a grant to do level 1 environmental assessment. This is pretty straightforward. It's not quite an emergency grant, but the grant has a revolving application cycle, and so it's a pretty fast turnaround time, about 6 weeks or so, in order to get the okay to proceed on doing level 1 assessments. And from what I understand, this is a pretty typical thing that a property owner would want to have in hand to help a developer feel a little more certainty with whatever the development would be. So it's just kind of a best practice or good protocol for doing a development partnership. The second step for this property would be to issue a request for letters of interest to develop the property, and then we would select a developer and enter into what they call a DDA, or a Development and Disposition Agreement. And so that's the typical process and where we're at on this particular property. Moving along to map number 11, which is city-owned property in the D-Lake district.
Allison, let me
Yep.
just jump back. So I guess one of the things we want to point out is that unless there are some objections from you, we are going to move forward with those 3 steps on this property.
Do you want me to go back? Nope. Okay.
So I guess the environmental study, then letters of interest, and then the third was,
Select a developer and enter into a development agreement.
personally, I don't have any problem with 1 and 2. The 3, I would hope would be all over it as a group.
Oh, that would come back to you.
Oh, okay.
So we could not dispose of the property without it going through you.
Yeah, that I wasn't worried about. Mine is more of what those letters of interest, to do, what somebody wanted to do with the property would be of more interest to me at that point. So.
Yeah, that's a great question. My general sense from interviewing people who've done this more than we have is that a letter of interest really takes a lot of the burden off of the developer to basically just submit a letter. And this would be, there's that conversation about, if we own a property, what do we as a city, as a community, want to have accomplished on that property? And we can basically tell them exactly what we want, or we can offer the property and see what people are willing to do. And somewhere in there is the sweet spot of, well, we want XYZ, but we don't need ABC, and this is really what the market is able to do on a property like this. So a letter of interest would be a more simple and straightforward general inquiry. And so people who are interested, and remember, the goal of doing property development is that the city doesn't own the property at the end of the deal. We don't want to be a landowner unless something has changed, but that's kind of how we've been operating, is that we've just purchased the property in order to get the development objectives accomplished. And then the developer would own the property and manage and operate and do all of those things. We would just end up with whatever the project is and whatever set of requirements we've imposed on them. So a letter of interest would be, I think we would see more response from a letter of interest rather than a request for qualifications or a request for proposals. I think that RFPs and RFQs, especially for a property this size, it's 1/4 of an acre, it's an infill development, all the utilities are there, it's pretty straightforward. But I think to require a developer to do a lot of upfront work without a guarantee that they will be selected, I don't think we would see necessarily any proposals. So if we're just basically shopping around to see who's interested, then we can talk about what it is and how to get it accomplished. So,
Allison, how are you shopping around? I mean, how are you getting the word out that you want these? Do you have a database that you market to?
yeah, that's another question that I asked these professionals. These are also, the people who I spoke with are also in Portland, which is an entirely different market than what we have. And I do intend to visit with some coastal people, developers and cities, to see kind of more how they do development. And it is tough. I have heard that people, there are places where you can post things, you can personally send them out to developers that you know do similar work. You can develop your own database by talking to other people who have done development and who they used or who they had responses from. It does take a lot of work, but I think it's possible.
Can we just list it with a real estate agent? Put a for sale sign on it?
We could also do that. It may or may not communicate as much of what we want communicated, but yes, we can do that. Okay. Moving along to the D-Lake District. This property is city-owned. It's 0.08 of an acre, and this has a building on it. This is the old TND, or Taft-Nelscott D-Lake Fire Hall. It has water and sewer, and there aren't any potential development hurdles. We think that this would be a good site for a business incubator, and so next steps with this property would be to conduct a full building inspection and report, develop a list of repairs and upgrades, interior and exterior, issue an RFP for improvements, develop a draft lease agreement, issue a request for letters of interest for an incubator concept and selection, finalize the lease agreement, and then open the business.
Incubator. We've tried that down below with offering space, and it didn't seem to go anywhere. We have plenty of existing storefronts. Why? Why would someone want this?
This would be something in a similar model to the Glass Studio that's in Taft, where we would make the place available for someone who was doing something tourism-oriented to help create a little more active, vital pedestrian tourism interaction. And we don't know, because we haven't put any letters of interest out. We have had some people call interested in renting the building, and so if, and we don't know what that price would be, again, because it does need some improvements.
What's the cost of just pushing it over? Just flatten it? Yeah, yeah, and then have a lot. And let's start from scratch on that.
to sell the lot or build
Yeah,
something?
or like we're talking with the other lots, can we do a mixed use and just flatten it and start over? Put it up for a proposal, or
I think we'll be able to answer that after we get an estimate on what the cost will be to do some fixing up with that. That's the one piece of information we don't know. It could be that the costs are so high it's not worth it, and so we should demolish it, but I don't think we can answer that without at least getting that estimate.
One quick answer is that with an existing building, you don't have to provide any additional parking. So there could be an interest in something that could go into that building without a need to provide parking for it.
and how big of a lot are we looking at?
It's less than 1/10 of an acre.
If I remember right, Allison, that's an eyesore, isn't it?
That's subjective.
It falls in your blight
It's an eyesore.
category, yeah.
Yeah, so here we are, we've got a blighted property. I think we should either follow the mayor's advice and bulldoze it over, or fix it up, then sell it, so it's not a blighted property. And let the market decide what it's worth. Put a for sale sign on it, list it, make it an unblighted property, or just say hell with it, bulldoze it, and put a sign on it. And use that revenue to eliminate another blighted property somewhere else. But to me, that, you either got to tear it down or fix it up. It can't sit how it is. It's an eyesore.
And I guess I would agree with everything you're saying and selling it. I mean, I'm, off the cuff, I'm not interested of being a landholder would be my objective.
I would hate to sell it as is, because you don't know that you're just going to have
Yeah,
damn thing sit.
I agree.
Yeah.
Map number 12, this is also in D-Lake. This property is just basically north of Les Schwab and south of the parking lot that's McKay's or Price and Pride. And this is a little more than half an acre. It's in the general commercial zone. Potential use could be mixed use. It has water and sewer, and in your last work session, we had this as a recommendation to sell for mixed-use development. If the city wanted to develop this, then we would follow similar steps to the other properties that we are already working on developing. So this one, just wanted to let you know it's available, and it's a larger parcel, so we can talk about that more. I want to be mindful of your time limits. Map number 14 is in Nelscott, and this is an urban renewal property. It has water, sewer, and this is where the newly relocated 32nd Street has come through. So the next steps for this property, again, would be to apply for a grant to do a level 1 environmental assessment, conduct a wetland delineation, obtain a current survey, and actually that order should probably be reversed, and then issue a request for letters of interest to develop the property, and again, select the developer and enter into a DDA.
How large is the property?
0.85 of an acre. Last I checked. Survey will confirm. And 51st Street property, we've talked about this over the past few years. 1.7 acres and has water, sewer. It's we originally envisioned this would be the Oregon Coast Weather and Tsunami Center, which didn't pencil out as feasible because the city would need partners in order to operate such a facility. And so developing commercial and retail property, this would help with increasing critical mass, which is that 10-10-10 rule of 10 retail, 10 entertainment, and 10 restaurant in the Taft area. And next steps for this, again, would be to do a level 1 environmental assessment. This one has had an environmental assessment as of 2003, so I'm currently speaking with the brownfield specialist to make sure that if we need a more current one, we can get a more current one, but it might be that we don't need one because there really wasn't anything found with this property that was of concern. And then issue a request for letters of interest, again, select the developer and enter into a development agreement. The last one is Hostetler Park, or Northeast First Street in D-Lake. And this one's 1.36 acres. It's in recreation commercial. It does have some challenges because of the elevation, riparian zone, significant wetland, tsunami zone. It has water and sewer, and the idea has always been to develop commercial or retail property, not on the whole site, basically just along Highway 101. And there are some easements that we will need to examine to just make sure that we are aware of what the development footprint actually can be. And so we would do a level 1 assessment on this if it's needed, look at the easements, we would do a wetland delineation, and then issue letters of interest and select developer and enter into development partnership.
I don't think we have that map from our
Yeah,
last.
this one is a new map. You are spot on. This one was left out of that first presentation, and the reason is really because I don't think that housing will go here. It's probably pretty much purely commercial. So since the last presentation we were talking about housing, this one was not included.
Could you send that one to us?
I will, yes.
Have you looked at the pictures in the hall of what Hostetler's Park used to look like?
Yes.
That would be a good goal. I think its highest and best use is a park, frankly. And if you could mix it with some commercial like that, that would be fantastic.
It's a pretty unique spot, so trying to, we always try to do highest and best use, and that's driven by the market and driven by your goals and objectives and community needs, so it's, there's a lot to balance for this site.
That's a diamond.
Anything else? Well, you got 5 minutes late, but that's okay. All right, any objection? We're adjourned. See you at 5:30.